Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I'm Sara Hanson, and today I will be discussing improving walking in place methods with individualization in deep networks. This work was done, as Vicky said, in collaboration with Haley Adams, Bobby Bodenheimer, and Richard Paris. Moving through a virtual environment is one of the most important interactions provided by virtual reality. Walking in place is a standard technique employed in virtual reality systems lacking external position tracking, yet it is not widely used due to performance issues, including stopping latency and velocity control. In this study, we seek to improve walking in place algorithms so that they are viable and easy to use locomotion solutions for mobile virtual reality. Mobile virtual reality means specifically systems with built-in tracking and not external position tracking. Specifically, we propose two novel algorithms, a deep learning-based algorithm and an individualized biomechanics speed-based algorithm. We compare the usability of these algorithms to a threshold-based algorithm. Previous studies discussed locomotion in mobile VR systems lacking external position tracking. In such systems, inertial measurement units are used to detect linear and angular velocity and acceleration, which inform walking in place motion. Paris et al. Set pre-programmed thresholds between vertical linear acceleration values in order to detect forward walking, and this is the technique we use as our threshold-based technique. Wendt et al. Approximated a head bobbing model from IMU data in order to inform user velocity, and we expand upon this biomechanical technique by individualizing both step rate and user velocity. Slater et al. And Rozek et al. Leveraged a simple feed-forward neural network in order to create a walking-in-place algorithm, and we employ a convolutional neural network. We assess three gaze-based walking-in-place algorithms. The video on the right there shows the marching motion that is typical to these algorithms. In these algorithms, user steering is driven by head orientation. Note this means the turn of one's head and not gaze-based and eye tracking following that. So vertical linear acceleration from a user's natural head bobbing motion, which is exaggerated by the marching motion, is used and detected. And based on a user's vertical linear acceleration, linear motion is imparted in the direction of the subject's head orientation. Specifically, we assess the three listed gaze-based techniques on multiple mobile VR platforms, in particular the Samsung Gear VR with the Galaxy S8 and the Oculus Go. We employ a state machine to model walking motion. The state machine is divided into two states, walking and standing, with walking further divided into the early stance and the late stance. In the threshold technique, users transition to the early stance walking when the magnitude of their vertical linear acceleration is greater than a predetermined maximum threshold, or Tmax. In this stance, users' velocity goes to a velocity maximum, and then users transition to the late stance when their vertical acceleration dips below a predetermined minimum threshold, or Tmin, and in this stance their velocity is decayed to a minimum velocity, or Vmin. After sustaining the late stance, users are designated as standing and their velocity is decayed to 0. The biomechanical technique and the CNN technique both modify this basic threshold-based state machine. In the biomechanical technique, we see the differences between the threshold-based technique and the biomechanical technique in blue. Specifically, the biomechanical technique individualizes the thresholds between the different states and uses an individualized Tmax and Tmin, and also individualizes users' velocity, so it's based on step rate and is not a predetermined maximum and minimum. The CNN uses triaxial acceleration data in order to categorize a user as walking or standing. When a user is categorized as standing, their velocity is immediately set to 0, and when they are categorized as walking, or in the orange box over there, then their states and transitions are the same as in the threshold technique. So our first experiment was designed to test these following hypotheses. First, we hypothesized that the individualized techniques will outperform the threshold-based technique in terms of usability, and we believe the lack of individualization in the threshold-based technique will lead to higher latencies and mismatches between step rate and optic flow rate, which will lead to worse user performance. Secondly, we also hypothesize that the gear will have inferior performance to the Go. This is because the gear was harder to train for the convolutional neural network than the Go. We tested these hypotheses using a locomotion control study. The study consisted of one environment, a maze defined by straight segments with sequences of gates. This is a locomotion control study, so users are tasked with stopping at each gate and use the gaze-based turning mechanism in order to navigate through the maze. So you can see an overhead of the maze on the left, which is where users will traverse through this linear maze and they can't get lost. And then the maze from the subject's point of view with those gates is seen on the right. 18 college-age students participated in a within subjects experiment. The experiment was conducted as a 2x3 design blocked on headset. Prior to entering VR, users were given brief instructions on how to walk in place, and calibration was required for the biomechanical technique in order to individualize both user thresholds and velocity. Subjects filled out a pre-test simulator sickness questionnaire before entering the first condition. There were 6 conditions and thus 6 trials. Each trial consisted of 5 minutes of walking in place, stopping at each gate. Subjects were instructed to stop as close to the center of the gate as possible, and we measured the distance between the subject's stopping location and the actual center of the gate. After 5 minutes, subjects were instructed to remove the headset and complete 3 post-condition surveys before moving on to the next condition. So experiment 1 measured several aspects of usability. Presence as measured by a standard Slater-Usow-Steed questionnaire and controllability as measured by stopping distance were both significant. As we can see in the image on the right, the Oculus Go in light blue performed significantly better than the Oculus Gear in terms of presence, which confirmed our original hypothesis. However, our second hypothesis was not confirmed. As seen in the bottom image, the biomechanical technique in light gray had significantly higher stopping error than the other 2 techniques. And the biomechanical technique was the only technique to employ variable speed thresholds. So this might indicate a possible speed and controllability trade-off here. These results were surprising, so experiment 1 only measured controllability. So to further assess the relationship between optic flow and perceived distances, we performed a distance estimation study. We hypothesized that the CNN and biomechanical techniques will outperform the threshold method due to their individualized approach. And in view of experiment 1, we also hypothesized the CNN will outperform the biomechanical method. In the second experiment, we assessed the robustness of each walking in place technique using egocentric distance estimation by blind walking in place. Experiment 2 is again a within subjects design with the same 6 conditions as experiment 1, but real walking was added as a ground truth condition, and we blocked on headset. So each of the 6 conditions consisted of 2 phases, maze-based calibration and ground plane distance estimation. An example maze from the first phase is shown on the left. This is the same maze as in experiment 1, and subjects were given 1 minute to familiarize themselves with the walking in place technique and the headset. In the second phase, subjects performed 9 distance estimation trials, and these 9 trials were 3 repetitions of 3 distances. As shown in the image on the right, subjects are stationary and are presented with a red hockey puck as a target. They are asked to estimate the distance to the target, and once they indicate that they are familiar with that distance, the virtual environment disappears, and they use either the walking in place technique or real walking to navigate to the puck. As seen in the center image, in real walking, subjects walked down a hallway. So in experiment 2, we measured the ratio of judged distance to perceived distance, or judged distance to true distance, whereby judged means both perceived and acted upon in the walking in place system. So as seen in this image on the right, the CNN, which is in orange, performed closest to real walking, which is in blue. In contrast to experiment 1, there was no visual feedback with which subjects could adjust their walking mechanic to stop closer to the puck. So we believe and attribute the better performance of the CNN to the technique's ability to better recognize general walking than the other conditions. In both headsets, subjects underwalked by an average of 26%. However, as seen in the figure on the right, the gear in orange performed closest to real walking and thus outperformed the Go. So we believe the CNN, because it was data-driven and trained by a large training set of people, was more robust to variations in the walking in place gesture. It could thus better interpret when subjects intended to walk in place and when they intended to stop. In total, this research has shown that walking in place interfaces can be successfully implemented in a data-driven manner on mobile VR platforms. In particular, a deep network approach to walking in place systems can lead to a successful locomotion interface on a commodity level system without external position tracking. And of course, we have also shown that some mobile systems may be better than others. We originally hypothesized that the biomechanics-based method would perform well, and this was not the case. So one limitation is that the biomechanical method did employ variable speed boundaries as opposed to a predetermined maximum and minimum velocity. So the implementation and reason for the biomechanical-based technique's lack of usability is a topic for further inquiry. Furthermore, expanding the role of the CNN to cover more functionality of the walking in place algorithm, such as velocity control, is a clear avenue for further research. And other machine learning methods, like a recurrent neural network, may be able to better capture walking sequences. Finally, we'd like to acknowledge our funding sponsors, the National Science Foundation, the Office for Naval Research, and congressionally directed medical research programs at the Department of Defense. Finally, I contributed to this research as part of a research experience for undergrads at Vanderbilt University. So thank you all for your attention, and I will take any questions.
Okay, so do we have any questions? Okay, so I'll start out with a question. Let me turn this thing off. So I know the goal was to do the walking in place. I'm curious. Well, two questions actually. Do you have any trouble with people with the algorithms just thinking that people are walking when they're just moving their head? And then the second question is, all these things come with a little controller, and I know maybe it's besides the point, but have you ever thought about just using the controller
Microphone up your mouth.
I need just a little bit more room on the court here to disambiguate the stopping.
Yes. Okay. So the first question was asking about what was the first question asking about? Sorry, I got lost.
It was how many false positives you get of people just.
Yeah. So the question was about if people can just move their head up and down to use the walking in place system, and they can move their head up and down to use the walking in place system. We're just hoping that we are specifically testing when people are using the marching in place motion. Of course, people can always cheat around the actual method itself if that's what they wanted to do. And then the second question was
about using a controller to disambiguate, because it sounded from your talk that the stopping was the hardest part.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you couldn't just go around the problem by maybe you taking advantage of strap it to the foot or something.
Yeah. So there have been previous studies that do attach systems with an IMU to a foot or to different body parts, and you could indeed use a controller to stop. But this specific study was trying to measure if we don't have to do that, if we can make a walking in place system that just relies on the IMU of the headset.
Thanks, Evan.
So I don't know if you've ever tried, there's a Steam VR middleware thing called Natural Locomotion that's lets you do kind of like walking in place, but it uses the controllers and you kind of go like this. And I've used it and it actually works pretty well. And I know that you didn't have two 6-DoF controllers in the mobile systems, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts about whether the approaches that you're using might be used to sort of improve the mechanisms for doing something like that, walking in place, but using handheld controllers.
Yeah, well, I've never tried that, so I'd be interested to give it a go. But yeah, that's correct. This is without any controllers, so perhaps if this technique could be used to improve that, they could add upon that, but I've never tried that specifically.
Thanks.